just on that end and share that microphone. You sit there. I'll take that. Both quite personal presentations in very different ways. You're very overt about it, even Marie, which is beautiful. I think the audience responded very positively to your honesty and your frankness, and we understand what that is about. Many of us have tried to do our own relationship, but we've lived through work and we understand those very confrontational issues that come with being an architect and dealing with architecture, particularly at that immediate scale. And you brought us into your work through a very personal intro about where you've come from as an architect and landscape architect and the history of your family, and then translating that into your kind of philosophical underpinning about the picturesque and landscape and all the rest of that. So thank you for that. And thank you also for the video. I mean, we all know architecture is about experience, and we saw pictures, but to see the images and to at least, even though we're not in the space, to understand more about the space and to hear those people say those things about the work. I mean, it must be so satisfying for you to have that kind of immediate response, and for anyone to hear a client say it's exceeded our expectations. That's super. You know, that's really, really special. So, congratulations. Yeah.
And the architect didn't make any statement, which was
that's
very deliberate. We absolutely did not want it to be about the architects. We wanted it to be about the people who actually wanted to be about the people who work in it. Not sure if it's working.
Yeah, just have close. Yeah. That's good. No, that was good. So, given that we've just ended on that project, let's talk a little about that. You mentioned you had collaborated with Timothy,
yep.
With Donovan Hill, but particularly with Timothy Hill on that project. Tell us a little bit more about how that happened, and I understand it happened after the practice had dissolved and Timothy had gone away? Or?
No, that was almost the last project they worked on.
Okay, so tell us a little more about that.
I actually can't quite remember how it went, but we ended up winning two significant competitions with Donovan Hill. One was at QUT, and it's the science precinct building, the STEM building at QUT, and then we did this other one for UQ. And I just can't remember how that panned out, but I worked with Brian on the QUT one.
Once he moved to BBN?
No. This is before. This is before, okay. and then Timothy on the other one. And shortly after that, the practice dissolved. Timothy moved to the UK and lived there for 2 years, literally caring for a dying friend. And it was incredibly, I mean, if you know Timothy, that's the sort of person he is. I mean, he often cares more about others than himself. And he said to me, well, I won't come back if there's no job. So then I had to look for another job for Timothy. And we won a $200 million residential project for UQ, and that was enough for him to come back. And then he moved to Tasmania with his partner, and then commuted up and down, and still is commuting up and down the coast. And I still see him read. But he's now set up his own practice.
He's set up again, yes. So perhaps for the audience, tell us a little, I know it's a longer story, but tell us just a little about how do you collaborate with Timothy Hill?
Right. Well, I mean, I guess that there's a bigger question about how do you collaborate with anybody.
Yes.
Everyone here, I'm sure, has experienced it. Collaboration is not easy, and I think there's two ways of describing collaboration. It's either cooperation or collaboration. Collaboration, by its nature, is actually there's an inherent friction. That's good and bad. And the biggest problem, I think, with collaboration is the clash of two cultures, not the clash of two architects. So it's the culture that each practice sets up that's different, which causes more friction than the conversation about an idea. But otherwise, I mean, Timothy is just incredibly generous to work with, and he's incredibly intelligent as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we bring Eva Marie into the conversation, you have a much smaller practice, as you showed in the final image. Tell us a little more about how you were, first of all, collaborating with your small team, and then what was it like to then step up and collaborate with Adam and SJB?
Well, I think in terms of our small team, we've sort of grown from 2 to 3 to 4 in over the last 15 years. So the way that usually there's a student, and I think over the time that I was having children, that's when I started realising that I had to employ an architect because I couldn't do everything and I couldn't just rely on juniors. So that's when the practice really stepped up. And over the last couple of years now, I've had people there for quite a long time. So I think even the ones that started as students, even though they're not registered, they've been in our practice for so long that they're just incredibly competent. And we work together. I mean, I sort of meet the clients. They call. We sort of talk to them. I'll go out and see them. We'll get them to come into the office, and then once we sort of start the design, we all go to the measure up together because it's a really good opportunity for us all to see the project and meet the clients and see the house. And then then I'll work on the project with one other person. But we all talk about all the projects in the office. It's a really small office. We all sit around one table together, and we're always, chatting, and everyone's aware of what everyone else is doing. So it's a very small team in that respect. So when we started working with SJB, the first project that we did with them, well, we've actually done 3 competitions with them, and the first one was great because there was a residential component, like a terrace house component to this tower that was going up. So they thought, as part of the competition, it would be a great idea to get 2 emerging architects and themselves to design these terraces. So we each did 2 terraces, and we just sort of mixed and matched them along the way. And that was one of the things that the jury really loved about the submission. So that was a great one to work on because it was a singular house. And then the next project that we worked on was much trickier because it was massive, and it took our office, I don't know how long it took our office just to get our head around the scale. We couldn't even imagine how big this thing was going to be. And we also weren't aware of what you could change and what you couldn't. We had a master plan to work with, and then Nick just comes up with this scheme where he just takes a whole building out of it. And we thought, we didn't really do that. We just don't know how far to push the brief. So it was really interesting learning those things along the way. And then working with Adam again is completely different again. And he's a good friend of mine, so it was all just, we'll work it out, and we did. And we just talked about things along the way, and they gave us quite good direction.
He's quite generous as well, isn't he?
Incredible, yeah.
Yeah. And so this is a successful project now, or you don't know yet?
We won that one too.
Forward.
Yeah, I don't know how it's all going to. We actually just lodged the DA on Monday. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, well, we'll see how keep an eye out for that one. So while I've got you talking about how you work, there seems to be an obvious underpinning to the work, and I just want to ask you about your history as an architect and where you learned your craft from, because you have an eye for detail and form and various other compositional techniques. Perhaps inform us a bit more about where you learned to be an architect.
I think it was like a mixture of everything. Like from a young age, we travelled a lot. My parents always took us to really amazing places, and they were always interested in travel and architecture. So that was always there. And then obviously university was just the most amazing experience. I absolutely loved university. And then I worked for some heritage architects, and it was like the glory years in Sydney. So there was a number of really amazing buildings that were being redeveloped, like the GPO and the Wollongong in the Wharf, and the wharfs at Wharf Bay. And I got to see what was going on with those, and just learn from people that had so much knowledge about heritage. And it was something that I was interested in. And then I sort of moved into a small practice where we sort of were, the practice was focused on sustainability, and it was a much smaller practice, and that's kind of where I learnt how to run a business, I suppose, in that respect. And yeah, I don't know, I think I in a lot of ways it was a lot of things that I've learnt along the way. It's just from experience all the way through it, and I think it takes time, you build up, and like you still make mistakes along the way. And the most amazing thing about the way that we work now is the relationships that we've formed with builders, because they're like the people that actually make it happen. And it's about talking through things and working out details and figuring out better ways to do things. And I really, really value those relationships. Yeah.
On that theme, given the work that you've built yourself, how much has that really influenced the way in which you think about detail and buildability in terms of approaching your relationship with your builders on your projects, which are very carefully crafted? But does your own building experience influence the way you think about detail?
Yeah, definitely. Especially, just understanding how to build things is so important. And even, even at the beginning of this year, Pete and I both got a lesson in bricklaying. And it was fabulous to be able to make some little retaining walls in our garden, and to actually know how it happens and understand what it takes. I think it's really, really important to actually have the experience of building. And I've always liked to make things, as Stephen said earlier. I think having the opportunity to build our own projects has been invaluable, and particularly for just things where you want something to happen, and so you think, okay, I just really want to get rid of that wall so I can do this and this and this, and then you realise how much intervention you're making and whether it's really necessary. And when you've been through that process and you've had to do the work yourself and also had to pay for it yourself, you realise what's important and what's not. And at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing that I've learned is, look, architecture's important, but in the scale of work that I do, and in any scale really, it's more important that you have a happy client at the end, because that's where you're going to get your next project from, and that's where you're going to get to try new things and keep on making beautiful work. So sometimes you have to understand where, not necessarily compromise, but maybe try a different avenue.
Just another question on the collaborative kind of process. I think it's important to understand that in Sydney, in the competitive process, it's a requirement in many councils for the selected architect to engage with and collaborate with an emerging architecture practice. And so I'd like to really just have both of you comment on the process of that collaboration in terms of the distribution of responsibility and the consequence of your own kind of ability to impact on the outcome.
That's not our office experience, but I know of that. There's usually the local architect that has to be. So doing a collaboration in Queensland would mean that you have to, particularly if we're working up north, we would have to collaborate with a small local practice. But more importantly, mostly we collaborate to be strategic about our resources. So we're a practice of 40. So to do a $2 million project is a big ask. And so we often, we have a set of expertise in our practice around education, laboratories. So we usually are quite strategic about who we will partner with. So we've worked with John Wardle in Melbourne, Adelaide, and in Brisbane, Lars Nimmo in Sydney, BVN and Donovan Hill in Brisbane, and Timothy in Brisbane, and smaller practices further up north. So when we set up a collaboration, we're very conscious that it's not a licorice all sorts, so it's just putting people together because you're asked to put people together. We're very conscious of, well, what can each of the practices bring that make the sum of the parts actually worth investing in. So that's the way we've normally done it.
I think with our collaborations with SJB, they've been a little bit, let's just see how this plays out. And it's because they're really quite generous as a practice. So we'll just meet up and see who's got what ideas, and then something will start evolving. And look, it's not the most efficient way to work, definitely, because we might be working on something and then send it over to them, and they might not get back to us, so we think they hate it, and then 2 days later they get back to us and say, yeah, where's that thing? And we just think, oh, we thought you hated it, so we stopped. You know, there's a lot of that going on. You just don't know what people are thinking. You don't want to be in their face all the time, and you're in different offices. So it can be a little bit disorganised, and it's a bit of an organic process.
It's a learning process.
It's a learning process for everyone. But yeah, it's just really interesting to see. At one point on the Penrith project, I think SJB, we hadn't been involved after we won it and everything, and we hadn't been involved for a while because they just had to document it. And then there was a whole lot of bits that weren't being resolved, and I ended up sort of talking to them and saying, look, do you want us to have a look at that for you? And thinking, you know, probably, I just thought it needs a little bit of attention. And like, they were so relieved, and then we just went back to the office and did all this work, and then they loved it, and we thought, oh, they're going with it. And it was just, Nick said it was just great to have someone else to do the thinking, because they were all caught up in their, you know, calculations, and we could actually sit and look at the architecture for a little bit and just, you know, tidy it up and bring it back to where it was meant to be. Because I think, yeah, you get lost. It's just, the deadlines are ridiculous, and how do you do it? I think it's a miracle to be able to, finish something that's good.
It was a great moment in time because Adam Haddow was overseas for his year off, and SJB was spread so thin. I was the chairman of the jury, so well done.
Yes, slightly different question, Hamilton, for you. And I don't know if you can answer it, but do you have can you describe in any way the difference, if there is one, between the form of architecture and the form of the landscape?
That's a cracker. I think they're symbiotic. I mean, there's different thinking processes, but they are connected so intimately.
Yeah. I don't think there's a right answer, but I want to hear how you think.
And I think my mother, as a landscape architect, hated architects. Like, you know, I can't tell you the number of times.
Did she marry?
She'd used the word bloody and architect in the same sentence. I mean, it was forever. You know, I was always very conscious of every manoeuvre that I would make that, in a way, didn't upset her sensibilities about bloody architects. And I think that, I mean, there is, look, Queensland, I'm not sure if it's the same in Wales, but Queensland seemed obsessed with the object and its indifference to the landscape. I think that's we're a product of that mentality that has been going on for so long. And so, in a way, I was very drawn to my mother's way of thinking, in that it seemed to counter the extreme nature of the architect being so often so rude and bloody. And I'm very fortunate in that sense. And my father was pretty sensitive, but never sensitive enough for my mother. Like, he would get curry.
So how much was the heritage of your family, lineage, in terms of the architecture and its emergence and your own position, influenced by looking back or looking...
Well, initially when I was a student, I ran away from the heritage because I thought it was like, who would look back? And then more recently, because my mother's written a book, and I've been doing a fair bit of research, and I've sort of realised, in fact, it is the lineage and the heritage that sits within the memory of everything you do. And I've become more aware of all of the legacy of the whole architectural community in Queensland, and how that's been shaped by our place. I think that, to me, there's so many lessons to be learned there. That it's not just my family's legacy, it's the whole of Queensland's legacy.
The kind of vertical expression in a lot of the projects suggests to me that you went to La Tourette sometime in history, and whether that was a conscious sort of...
No, I wish I had. I just look at pictures, yeah.
Maybe it's subliminal. But I think you've struck an important point. The heritage of any sort influences what we do, and even Marie, you touched on it too, in two ways, and maybe you could answer this question then, but you had an interest in heritage in an architectural sense through having worked with heritage people and gained an appreciation and a love for it. But also you started your presentation with your Greek heritage. I just wonder, because you didn't elaborate, apart from your father's house, on that Greekness, do you feel that there's anything in your later work that is still influenced by that heritage and also your understanding of etymology, language?
Perhaps. I think I've always loved the idea that the way different cultures express beauty, and I'm really interested in that. And and I have always loved history. So I don't know about the language thing though. I'm wondering how that might tie in.
It's only because you started with it.
Yeah, well that's just being Greek. Greek people want to think that every word comes from a Greek word.
Well, it kind of does.
Yeah. Thank you for noting that, Stephen.
Your comments on your Greek heritage awoke a memory of mine of 60 years ago. My first girlfriend was Greek, and she was from Kythera.
Really?
And it seems to me that every Greek in Australia comes from Kythera.
No, not in Australia, just Brisbane and Sydney.
Melbourne has a fair few too, yeah. So, is there anybody still left on Kythera?
No, there's only 3,000 left, and there's a massive diaspora here. Yeah.
Especially in Melbourne.
I can tell you the story about that later.
Over dinner, perhaps. I think we're coming close to the end of our evening. We do have a lucky door prize if we can have the bowl. If you haven't thrown a card in quick while it's moving from there to here, you can throw a card in and you might win that bottle that's sitting inside. There we go. Okay.
It's pretty Cytherian.
Thank you. Okay, so maybe Eva Marie, you get the honours.
Sorry, an SJB one. Have to be DKO.
Richard Todd.
Gone.
Next, left in the room. Another
Oh,
DKO.
another DKO. Nawakunda. There must be something to that.
Okay, so hand that over. There you go. Congratulations. Okay. So, if we could just give thanks to our wonderful speakers this evening. I think you'll agree we've had two very wonderful presentations, and this is one of the things I like about our double talks, is that we have two different people giving you their interpretation of what it is to be an architect that can show so many differences, yet so many similarities and overlaps between what we all do. So I think that's been very much highlighted with this evening's presentations. On behalf of Brickworks, I thank you all for coming. And if you know people that don't know about what we're doing here, please let them know and get them on the mailing list. And for those that do know what we do, we also have a stream of international series talks. And our next international speaker will be coming in just under 1 month's time, in October. On the 9th, Tuesday the 9th of October, so make that in your diary. We have a wonderful lady called Francesca Torresol from Genoa in Italy. She is currently being exhibited as part of the Arsenale exhibition at this year's Venice Biennale, and she has been generous in finding some time in her schedule to come and join us and do her tour of Australia in October. So please come and join us then. Thank these people one more time. Stick around. Stick around for a final drink. Please come and chat to them. You have some time before we take them off to dinner to come and talk to them, ask some questions, have a chat, and thank you and see you next time. Thank you.